What's up, guys? Stoked about the next couple weeks worth of these. The next few folks we have lined up for these are just stupid. At least the next 3 or 4 weeks of these are going to be awesome. If you haven't yet, go scoop a spring mystery bag. www.terpene.com. Wait for our guest to hop in here. All you got to do is hit that little button that's popped up to say request to join. Let's hope it works better than last week. Last week we had some problems. Join the chat. There we go. There we go. There we go.
Hey.
Yeah. There we go. Not too bad.
Yeah, looks better now.
Yeah. Yeah, nice. Yeah, I mean, these things are just hit or miss. It's like Instagram is probably the worst place you can do these, but it's just where I have the most people that follow me, and so it's like the best chance of getting people to actually watch them. And then to be honest, most of them is just going up on YouTube anyway, because watching them on here after the fact is kind of a pain in the ass. And then, it's just, ideally we'll eventually start doing these somewhere else, YouTube or something like that. But it's just a matter of, like I said, this is kind of where all my followers are at the moment.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I think Instagram, for cannabis in general, does a lot of helpful things, but at the same time, it's like the worst app to use.
Yeah, it's got to make up at least a percentage of their overall user base is cannabis stuff. I mean, I'm not saying it's 50%, but there has to be a percentage of it. Yeah, they kind of treat us kind of shitty for, what amounts to a reasonable amount of content for free.
Yeah, no doubt. Everything we've kind of done is developed around Instagram for like the last 10 years. So it's this weird like love-hate relationship where it's a really useful tool, but you can get sucked in. And then, like you said, like they don't really allow us to use it to the best of its ability.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of it too is user base. Right. If it weren't for the fact that they have the biggest and most active user base around, then we would go use whatever else was, a better option. But it is what it is. Anyway, how are you doing this weekend?
Dude, pretty good. We're it's unprecedentedly dry up here in Michigan. So this is our like third year growing outside, and the first year, normally Michigan, the problem is too much water. And so like this spring has been weird. I think we got like under a quarter inch all of May. So like right before I hopped on here, I was doing some things. We're going to actually start watering our pastures and some things outside that I've never had to worry about before. Which
yeah, I would imagine with as much water as you guys have around you, it would stay pretty humid.
Right. Yeah, I'm like an hour east of Lake Michigan, in southern Michigan. So we are right on the edge of that lake effect. And then this is funny. My street is actually the climate zone line too. So I'm in this weird like little area that's hard to know what's going to go on. And normally that lake effect just keeps everything. Like last year, we did a lot of dry farming and didn't water our plants at all from July, like June, July until they were done. And this year we actually we've delayed everything and haven't put anything in the ground, just waiting. It's not only been dry, but the last week has been in the 90s, which I've never seen at the end of May here. So we've still got everything waiting to go to their final homes, just kind of chilling until we get a couple of days of better weather. Normally we plant when there's a few days of rain, and this year I'm just settling for a cloud. And I'll be
you guys, I mean, as far as pure outdoor goes, you guys have about as bad of a situation as like Colorado, for instance, because like when winter comes hard and fast.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when I moved here, I'm from Kentucky, and I was kind of under the impression outdoor in Michigan was not feasible. At least quality outdoor wasn't feasible. Right. So I spent the first few years inside growing with salts on kind of a sort of large scale. And I'm not sure exactly what happened. I think my business partner just threw a couple pots outside one year, and they did so well that it kind of reframed our thinking about it. And now over the last 2 or 3 years, we've had a lot of success just with the right genetics primarily. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges is there can be really, really great genetics, but if you put them here, a lot of them just mold out. So that's gotten us into breeding a lot as well. And another reason that I've been popping a lot of your gear, I know you're breeding inside, but it seems to do phenomenal here. Haven't had like rot or any issues with stuff I've popped from you. So we actually worked like the Nag Champa F1s last year into 2 or 3 new lines with females that we've noticed will go like all the way through October, get rained on every single day and still handle it well.
I wish I could take credit for that, but to be honest, man, it's just about using solid stuff. So it's like a lot of that stuff that I used is like, especially with like the aficionado or the dying breed stuff, any of that stuff that I've worked with, all those California dudes breed for is outdoor stuff.
Right.
And it's like, so a lot of it, the other thing with hash plants too, is if you generally focus on hash, and hash is kind of your goal, you're going to not have like those rock hard buds, because it's just not as easy to extract the whole bud. So like, it's not that I don't select for yield and for stuff like that. It's just that at the end of the day with flower structure, I tend to pick stuff that's big and dense, but not in that like granddaddy purple, old school, dense Afghan kind of structure. Because I mean, it's great for flower, but it doesn't do well to extract, you know?
Right, for sure. Well, so far it's all worked great. We just popped, I grabbed one of those few Palo Santo packs that you posted up like a year or so ago. We just popped those last night, so I'm excited to see how that goes.
Those are all of that, dude. I don't remember off the top of my head who did that collab with me, but everything that they posted from those was just phenomenal.
Yeah.
Like phenomenal.
Yeah.
It was one of those that just that white truffle or whatever they were using just had huge tripe.
I haven't gotten to run the white truffle, and it, at least in our market, for our end product, it's a little played out. So I'm very interested to get a chance to like it work with the genetics, but combined with something as unique as the Nag Champa, it'll still be viable for us to put out there.
Yeah, and it's, you know, with those sorbet crosses especially, like I always say that if you just ran 10, you know, the chances of you getting 2 keepers that are so distinctly different in profile, or at least distinct enough that you're like, I can't get rid of one of them. You know, like I've had a lot of people tell me that with that sorbet stuff.
Yeah.
That just generally speaking, it's like no matter the cross, plant to plant, the chances of you finding even a couple that are so unique but in their own way that it's like tough to kill some of them. I've had the same problem. Those sorbets, I just get super anal, and I'm like, if you look even weak, if you look even a little shitty, if you don't handle newts well, why keep it? Just toss it.
That's my like kind of general approach at this point, and I think that's been necessary growing outside in Michigan. And another reason I got into breeding, because this will be the first year I'll be able to take, 100 seeds, throw them in a bed and be like, all right, the moment you do anything that's not perfect, like you're gone. And I really enjoyed doing it that way, and just like, like you said, being super anal and just eliminating anything that really, really doesn't strike my fancy.
That's the thing. Like I have people ask me all the time, like, what was the hardest lesson you learned? Or like, for me, learning that lesson of like not being so picky and just like letting the health of the plant be number one.
Yeah.
So if you have anything that's just, it lags, I don't like its flowering time, it took 2 weeks to just kind of get to where the other ones, just throw it away.
Yeah.
And that sort of selection is, tons of people tell me like, man, I've run your stuff against other people's stuff, and it's almost always faster. Everything kind of has a little more vigor and stuff. And I'm like, it's because I just don't fight with shitty, scrappy plants.
And I don't idea of like growing plants that are finicky for the terps.
Yeah,
like I get it, but those terps exist in a non-finicky version.
In a healthy plant. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so
absolutely.
That whole idea I don't understand. I do think this is perpetuated by the cost of seeds. at this point. And not to devalue anybody's work, but if you're getting 10 seeds for $250, like you're not going to kill one of the 4 females you get for
Right. No, you're
$250.
right. You're right. You're right.
And that's unfortunate, because I don't want to devalue people's work and all the things they put into it, but we're also forcing consumers to buy seeds and like select stuff that, in my opinion, aren't actually keepers.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, let's be honest, like an eye for selection is a tough thing, especially because as much as you're trying to see what's there, the hardest part of the job is seeing what's not there. Knowing what you don't know, and just going into each generation, like I said, with that kind of eye of like, if it doesn't keep up, if it's not 110%, it's just not worth fighting for. The other thing that I think I see in some other people's genetics is that when you're specifically working with hype cuts, right, and it's one pheno, let's say it's Gorilla Glue or it's, OG Kush, you have that one plant to work with.
Right.
Because it's normally a clone only. You're stuck with whatever pros or cons she has.
Right.
You didn't get to pick a male because usually it's a female that's a clone only that's super hype. So you're picking, if you're making a cross with it, you're picking a male. But like, so there's a lot of like, in working with hype cuts, there's a little bit too of like, you have to deal with the fact that these are old plants. They're usually plants that have been cloned of clones of mothers of clones of mothers of clones. And it's like, in working with that stuff, we are able to kind of inject some more of that hybrid vigor. But you have to understand that usually F1s made with those older cuts are gonna struggle a little bit still. And you're still gonna see a lot of that kind of just depression, just slow, not really as vigorous, not always, once again, the further you kind of cross away from that, the less of that you kind of see, and you can kind of work it back into something. But, it's another thing that I see a lot of people working with is that the other problem is so many of these hype cuts that we get into the whole argument of, is it really the cut? Or did you end up with an S1 of something that somebody made in their garage and they just said, yeah, it's Gorilla Glue because how it came labeled to me, there's a lot of that when you're dealing with high. And that's one of those things where like I generally like to select all of my stuff from seed. Right. Because not only do I know its pedigree, I don't have to get into a squabble with anybody on the internet about if this is the right one, the only one. Of course it is. I pulled it out of the bag. I pulled it out of the seed. Like I know where it came from. Right. And that's one of those things that like, like you said, I don't want to devalue anybody's work because I think all of that stuff is valid. If somebody finds something in a strain that they really love, work with it, breed it out, cross it, do whatever you want with it. But, in working specifically with clone-only strains, especially ones that are kind of on the older side, you kind of get everything that comes with. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? The good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah. Well, I think that's where, like, going back to the hype of seeds and like in cannabis right now, that's a way a lot of people make a lot of money, which is great. But I also think we see a lot of F1s on the market and they're with these hype cuts. Yeah. And that doesn't really set people up for a lot of success either. And like you said, that's kind of been our approach as we started breeding a few years ago, is to, before we ever even release anything, we're a couple generations down from that. So we know the male and the female, the plants that it came from seed, selected it. And then that's where, like, in my opinion, a breeder's work really starts to become their own. If you're just taking hype cuts and then hitting it with a male out of a pack, there's so much there that you haven't like worked and dialed in yet, for sure.
And you guys specifically breed and grow for hash?
So when I first started growing like 4.5 years ago, I was doing flower inside just because that was the financial opportunity at the moment. But I've always been a hash smoker for the last 10 years, and we pretty much were just pulling small amounts out. Over the last like 2 years, we've switched entirely away from that because I kind of just lost motivation for flower. I don't smoke, or I at the time didn't smoke flower at all. So it's like, in order for me to R&D, like I love to joke, a huge part of our job is just smoking weed. Like we have to smoke a lot of weed. It's exhausting sometimes.
Horrible. Fucking
And like
horrible.
if I'm not smoking a lot of flower, then how can I like be putting flower out there? The last year or so, I've started smoking flower again. So this year, I'm going to step back into it a little bit. But as far as the breeding projects and the main production goals and everything, it's entirely for hash. I mean, the market has definitely went that way, and it's what we smoke. So it's easier for us to sit down and go through 10 jars in an evening rather than 10 joints.
Right. And I think for me, like, it does get to be a personal preference thing on some level. I think after you've been smoking for 25 years, you kind of go like inhaling flaming plant matter, especially when you got a good joint habit where you're
Yeah,
just blazing through unfiltered joints, 8, 10, 12 in a day.
yeah.
I mean, let's be honest, man.
Not
You
good for you.
need, yeah, it's not great for you. I'm not gonna say it's gonna give you cancer or anything, but it's
Right,
just not great for you. And
right.
then the other side is kind of with hash. I've always found hash, unless it's just really dank weed, hash is generally a closer approximation of the live plant and
For
of the
sure.
true live
Yeah,
essence of the plant. And so with flower, as much as I love flower, I just have this, I'm so picky about what I really would want to roll up that
yeah,
I'm like,
exactly.
90% of the flower that I see should just have been hash.
Yeah.
And
Well, and
most of
I,
it's just not made that way, but like,
I think like honestly too, flour's harder. Like if I've learned anything, like 10 out of 10, flour is a lot of work. And I think a little bit pickier there. I think you can, whatever issues you may have on a run or a season or anything like that, hash is a lot more forgiving. So it allows, especially from a
especially
business standpoint.
BHO, especially
Yeah,
solvent
yeah.
hash. Yeah.
I mean, and even solventless, like if you know what you're doing, it's hard to like mess up your hash. Um, Flour, like you can have some really small things in the drying process, or just very small things go wrong that like you
Right.
can grow the best flour ever, and if the drying process messes up for 6 hours, it's noticeable.
Yeah.
So I think flour is just more difficult. I do think there's going to be like all of the cycles in the cannabis industry go in ebb and flow. So like I think there's going to be a resurgence of flower over the next couple of years, and like more on the craft end, which I think will be cool to watch because I
Yep.
don't encounter flower really at all that I'm excited to roll up, like you said. And then the big thing that we're focusing on right now and has always been the focus is full melt. My personal philosophy is like rosin exists when you can't get it to full melt. That's like that rosin's a backup. You know what I mean? At least for me, there's definitely a lot of terps and some things about rosin that you can't really get in water hash. But personally, I think that's where like the middle ground between flower and rosin really hit for me, and where I see like the truest expression of the live plant, like you said.
Yeah. So here's the long and short of that discussion, right? with with melt, right? There's really only two things on the planet, right? If we're being brutally honest, there's absolute true 6-star.
Yep.
It leaves no char. It's
Yep.
just oil, and then there's rosin material.
Yep.
And that wasn't the case many years ago because there
Right.
was tons of 4-star and 3-star and shit with char and just not great hash on the market. Now I think we've gotten more to a point where it's either that if it's not true 6-star,
Yep.
it just gets pressed. And
Right.
there's so many people that like there's a lot that goes into that as far as loss and as far as how much you're going to lose to the bag, as far as profit yields. If we're talking about a commercial garden, there's a
Right.
whole different situation. But the reality is, like, just like with flour, the thing that we need to look at on a larger scale is the grading system.
Yep.
Because let's be
Agreed.
honest, if it's not AA flour, it should go into hash. If
Yep.
it's not AA hash, it should go into rosin
Uh-huh.
or BHA, like, and that's the thing that we're seeing more that's happening
Agreed.
as the hash market kind of gets bigger.
Uh-huh.
Because all of the US and hash, especially as it looks now, is all brand new. Like,
Yeah.
that's not something that's been happening for 30, 40 years. Like, the hash culture in America is something that's pretty brand new.
Yeah.
And it's still something we're figuring out on a lot of levels, especially on a commercialization level.
Yeah.
And especially because not every state is legal yet.
Yep. Yeah, it's been wild to watch that whole progression. I'm 29 now, so I am from Kentucky. So I interacted with like open blasting in a kitchen at 18, and then like very shortly after that was the whole flower rosin, that whole wave, and was lucky enough to see that from the beginning through Instagram, and just watching it anywhere from like my business partner used to fly to Oregon and he would go get melt just to ship back to me in Kentucky and him in Illinois so we could press it on hair straighteners and jar it up and like show it to people for the first time. And
Right.
to remember having to do that, like having to take plane tickets, go drive out through the mountains, and then like send these coolers with dry ice in them through the mail just to like press something on a hair straightener. And then now to just see where it's at is incredible.
Yeah, it's to think that we started with hair care products.
Yeah.
and glorified T-shirt presses,
Yep.
and that now we have, commercial washing machines, and we have, and like I said, so I won the first ever rosin competition in 2015 with a hair straightener. Rosin at that point had maybe been around in very niche circles.
I think that's
for
the first
a year
I smoked
or
rosin,
two.
2015.
Like maybe 2 years. The first time it hit my ears was like 2013, 2014.
Right.
So somewhere in there I started to hear about it to now.
Right.
It has changed so much. And that's one of those things that's not butane hash, especially. The tech itself had kind of been around since the 70s,
right.
because people kind of understood that butane would work well in that capacity.
Right.
And melt and things like that had been around, bubble hash and things like that. But like when rosin came around, I hate to say it was an entirely new field, but in a lot of ways, the absolute tech of it was brand new.
Yeah, it was.
And was something that like nobody really had any experience on. So when you see so many of those first presses and some of the first like we didn't even have bags. For a long time, what we would do was there was a spot where we could get screens for open blasting.
Yeah.
You would get like these mesh screens, and it was the same material, and we would use it to like, to be fair, I open blasted, so we had them from time to time.
Yeah.
But like you would just use those and make a little pocket and just put that in there and pray it stayed in the pocket.
Huh.
And I don't know, man, how many times we blew out or, we're trying to figure all that out, just how much you fold it, how much do you need. And then, within maybe 6 months of like the first time we put it out commercially on a shelf, we had like bags. We had run into somebody at a cup that was tinkering around with some stuff, and they were just literally taking that same material we had and stitching it with a sewing machine. And then they would kick up a couple bags and be like, try this. It's R&D. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, just throw it away and don't use it,
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, just to see something not only that started pretty much here in the States, but that it's the expansion and the commercialization and almost to the point of industrialization of rosin at this point has been all natural and just about as American as, I don't eat apple pie, but I smoke the shit out of hash. So let's be honest, to me, it's more American than apple pie,
Hell yeah. Yeah, that's it. The amount of like R&D and like shout out everyone that over the last 10 years has just like lost money, lost time, lost energy, just going like, we'll see. I remember when I first started making flower rosin, what I would do was go buy pounds in Kentucky, go home, take an eighth and squish it on a hair straightener, and if it yielded well and smoked decent, then I'd keep it all. And if it didn't, I'd text somebody and go flip the pound and be like, it's an eighth short, my bad. And then like go try a new flavor. And I remember like throwing stuff in the oven, doing the old Xbox tech, and like ruining, like, you know, you spend all day squishing an ounce of flour into rosin, and then you try to do some heat tech to get it to cure better, and then you waste the whole thing. Like, just, I know there's so many people out there that can relate to that idea, and like just the losses to learn how to do this, and how everybody's done that, and then put everything, again, talk about Instagram, like out there for people to see, and just like open source it. And
It's all
now
been
like,
open source too. That's the beautiful thing about rosin,
yep,
and even to a degree BHO,
yep,
because a lot of that, the crystallization tech of the high terpene full spectrum, like that whole crystals and terps tech, that was
yeah,
all crowdsourced, open source. That was
right,
all people putting in trials and errors and figuring it out. I don't know how many whole crops I turned over to the homie who I
mm-hmm.
knew was like, we were working on the forefront of all of this. And I was just like, here it is. Tell me how long it takes, whatever it. And 90 days later, we're getting 90 fucking days later, we're getting crystals and terps. And it was something most people had never seen before. And we're having like jars of them. And it was really, like you said, people who were just dedicated, who were willing to take the chance, who were willing to just see what happened, put the material out there. And that's the whole thing, is to make great hash, it takes a ton of great material. Like, you know, to make a decent amount of hash. So it's like, once you get to a commercial level, there's so much to like finding a strain that's going to dump, but
Mm-hmm.
that also has all of the nuances that it's going to produce that flavor to the finished product.
Right.
And it's like, that's why selection for, especially selection for water hash, and with the end goal being rosin,
Right.
it's one of the toughest things to breed for.
Right.
Because you can take average strains and make really good BHO with it.
Mm-hmm.
Really good BHO.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't take average strains and make really good rosin with it.
No.
Especially
No.
not flower rosin. Like, my experiences
Oh
with
no,
flower
it's so
rosin
hard.
have been so spotty that I just
Yeah.
always went, just wash it.
Yeah.
Just
See,
wash
and
it.
that
It's
was
just,
like the flower rosin days were like the year and a half before we figured out how to do the rest of that, and that definitely left pretty quickly. We've been talking about relooking at flower rosin for strain specific capsules and tinctures and things like that, because we love doing rosin, like hash rosin, into products like that. But through the flower rosin process, we think with the right genetics, you could keep more of the actual terpenes from the strain and get them into the capsules and tinctures. So I think that's something too that's kind of fell away, and like all these methods have some little place there. But like you said, that's a really hard thing to figure out, and you need like the perfect plant. And I mean, I've only been growing, at least at like any sort of scale, for 4.5, 5 years now, and there's maybe like 5 strains that like I've gotten from elsewhere that I didn't hunt, that I'm like, okay, this actually hits enough boxes for me, and that's through hundreds. So I definitely agree, and especially if we start talking about true 6-star, like finding I don't even know how to go about that yet as far as breeding, because you've got the male, so I feel like you'd have to work so many generations to see the male's potential to influence the melt quality, and then like actually work it into something. But that's not something I've gotten to yet.
the kind of weird thing about breeding for hash is that even in the best case situations, the customer is going to have to go through some seeds to find that specific strain.
Yeah.
And it's like, even if I tell you that it's going to have, a particular strain is going to have a really high ratio of great washers, right? So then we get into a whole long discussion about the fact that in order to call it a great washer, for some people that just means it throws a bunch of hash.
Right.
That's
very
just
common.
means it throws a bunch of hash. Well, if it dumps a bunch of hash, but it's mostly wax and there's not a ton of oil in the trichome, then you're just going to lose it all to the rosin bag, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not going to melt well. Then if you have that strain that has thin cuticles around the trichome head and great oil, but it's too much oil,
Yeah.
So now every time you glance up against the trichome, it just explodes and it won't hold up to the ice in the wash.
Right.
So there's so many factors of what makes amazing melt that it's not just about, and then we get into a whole discussion about if we're pressing it, how does the rosin taste?
Right.
Because so
What
many
terpenes do we
strains,
lose from the 170 degrees?
right?
Yeah.
So many strains, by the time you get it to rosin, just kind of tastes like hash,
Yeah.
or it's, you know, it's kind of a vague profile. Like the strains that a wash grade dump and the finished product doesn't lose a shitload to the bag, and the hash tastes great. Jesus, man.
Well, I mean, there's even another factor there, and I think this is lost. Like, this isn't talked about enough right now. But your biomass yields before you even wash it. Like, you know, I hear all these people and like their rule is, well, it's got to do 5%, and it's like, okay, but what does that actually mean? Like, we're not talking about resin per square foot of canopy, which I think is a lot more accurate there, because you can have a strain that throws down 65% of the biomass that another one does, and it can do 3.5. That one can do 5, and you're really at the same place. So I think there's, like you're saying, there's just so many factors there, and you can't judge it by one of them.
Well, and that's the thing that, like, when we got into like doing the numbers on a commercial level, a strain that dumped but that had super waxy trichomes might as well have still had a low yield, because at the end of the day, you lose so much to the bag and so much of waxes and so much, you know, that just because it throws, just because it throws great numbers into your first number, you know, your first yield, if your goal is rosin or 6-star and you have to rosin it and you lose a good chunk of that, what was the point?
Right.
Well, you know, what was the point?
This is something, for us at least, we're at a pretty small scale at this point. And so we've had some freedom, especially growing outside, where we don't have to necessarily pick strains that dump super high. Like, we, you know, that's by all means the goal, but we're starting to have more freedom to look for stuff that still makes good hash. And it's, you know, haze terps has been something, which is why I love the Nag Champa. It's got that tie from the pineapple sorbet that's a little haze leaning. And I think I've watched some other people doing this too, and they're not looking so much at, like, because it's not a commercial situation, these high yields. It's like, how do we get flavors that nobody's gotten to interact with in rosin yet? Because in the past, everybody was running high number strains only, and we just hadn't done enough research and done enough breeding to really get some of these, you know, rarer terp profiles into a plant that may not yield really well, but at least the resin is quality and is workable, so we can get through that process and it not be a waste of time. More and more we see that, because as far as hash customers go, everybody just wants the next flavor. They want to try the thing that nobody's tried, and so a big part of this is just like, you've got to stay a few steps ahead at this point and go, okay, what's something that like what's something I personally have never smoked in hash form? And we've been kind of sitting down asking that question and then looking at genetics and going, all right, how do we get it there? And that's actually what got me to buy the Nag Champa seeds originally, was like the Thai genetics in there. And that's not something you see in wash strains ever, really.
I do want to say one thing as we talk about that, in the hazy profile of that, in that there's a lot of, there's kind of a misconception that haze is just haze and it's all, there's kind of two distinct haze type of, one of them, when I think of haze, it's kind of just more of an old world profile. When I think of like the old school peppery, like the old kind of just cough your ass off old school haze, that's what's in the Nag Champa. Right. Now, then we have kind of the sweeter Ghost Train haze,
the like pith
type of,
the like New York
New World haze, if you will. Post Dutch haze might be another way to put it, you know? Yeah. Because once all of those strains kind of hit Amsterdam and they realize, well, this doesn't really grow super well, let's bang it into a bunch of this other stuff and make, you know. And so we still see a ton of those. But as I got into those sorbets more and more, I just found one in the F4. It was the first time I had ever seen it. F3 or F4, I'd have to look. I don't remember. I think it was F3 maybe. And it was just pure pepper. But it looked like a modern hybrid. So it had
Whoa.
all of that. It looked just like the sorbet, beautiful, hybrid, frosty,
Oh, that's
everything. But
cool.
it smelled like a 74 tie. Like it smelled like old school weed. And that was it. There were no fruit notes.
Huh.
There were no, like in the sorbet specifically, and that the Nag Champa is one of those crosses. In all of those sorbet strains, they're so complex. You've got candy pineapple, you've got incense, you've got coconut. I
Mm-hmm.
always say it reminds me of a fruity drink on the beach. Like it's very tropical.
Yeah.
But then to find something like that that was just pure Thai, it was just absolutely pure Thai. There wasn't a fruit note. It would make you sneeze
Whoa.
if you stuck your nose in it because it just smelled like black pepper.
That's crazy. I can see it, but that's so, and this is where like selecting and breeding in general, this just started to fascinate me because you're how many years and 3 generations into that, and now you find something that you haven't seen the whole time. That's so
Yeah.
cool.
Well, the other thing is like I keep seeing another thing that I like. I like to kind of address things. You and I you chatted before this about something that I had said at some point that you didn't agree with 100%. And I
Yeah,
think,
yeah.
being able to have these sort of discussions of things that you see, and maybe it's not the same exact 100%, but like one thing that we have to quit doing is shitting on polyhybrids. This
Yeah.
is why. Because
Okay.
I see this all the time, and it's like back in the day, and it was this and it was that. Back in the day, you got weed, and it either tasted like weed, or if you were lucky, it was piney, or it had
Yeah.
one note. Had
Yeah.
one note.
Yeah.
It was very simple. You know, today's polyhybrids are the reason we have these deeply complex
Mm-hmm.
profiles. And
Mm-hmm.
it's the reason that we keep digging into seeds is because it's only getting more complex.
Yep.
And we're starting to see now that some breeders are trying to get away from just breeding 100% for high THC.
Right.
People like myself, people probably like yourself, like other breeders that we talk to, are finding that if they breed specifically for whatever it is that they like. So I found a strain and it has this weird thing, and I'm breeding for that, this
Mm-hmm.
unique flavor. Now we have more of that in the gene pool.
Yep.
So now the next generation is going to have more of whatever that thing is that you fell in love with.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, as more people, especially smaller breeders and people who aren't necessarily huge grow houses, are able to focus on these unique terpenes, these unique cannabinoids or cannabinoid, you know, combinations,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what you want to work
Yeah.
on, then
Yep.
that means as we go forward, there's more of it. So
Right.
it's like this notion that like polyhybrids are super inferior. First of all, your favorite strain was a polyhybrid, whether you want to admit it or
Yeah.
not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nobody's
Yeah.
smoking pure landrace weed 100% of the time. Like,
Right.
that's super rare. And, at the end of the day, the reason we have the complexity, the reason we have seen now so much unique shit in this gene pool is because people just bang shit together.
Yeah. Just throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. You mentioned like bringing up before this conversation, and I think it shows like how many times I've disagreed with people about cannabis, and then all of a sudden the conversation's over. And that's why I'm all for it. Like I don't want to talk to people I agree with everything. I don't get anything done. But I think I've seen this a lot like the last year or two, like at least on the black market end, the cannabis scene has gotten a lot more difficult the last like year or two financially. So I've seen a lot of this, and it's just people putting other ideas down, like, no, this is the way, super dogmatic, like, I found the answer. And I think, like, the beauty of the plant, of one of the big beauties of the cannabis plant is there's a million ways to grow it. And I've never done it the same way twice. I would get
Yeah.
bored, I think. Like, every time it's different. So I think, like, remember somebody said something recently to me, and it's like there's nobody in the cannabis community is competing. Like we're all here to just open new doors for each other, and I think that's exactly what the polyhybrid thing is. It's like let people just bang out stuff. Let the smallest guy throw some seeds and just pick one that he likes. Personally, all of my favorite stuff that I select from seed, I know like quickly. I know it's like it's that one for some reason, and maybe it's not
Right.
even, but I stick with it. And
Right.
like you said, the like that unique thing, we found this plant last year, and it was a fem seed called Guava Jam. My buddy got from a friend, popped it. It did like 1.7 to rosin or something like that, but had this like cured lunch meat funk thing that
Yeah,
was really weird. Like,
yeah,
just this, and it had that pepper too that you're kind of talking about, like black
yeah.
pepper, cured lunch meat, and like somebody told me like a pink peppercorn, like a fruity peppercorn.
They're not as
Um,
spicy. They're not as like heavy mercy and spicy on the nose. Yeah,
right,
it's a little.
right.
It's like the white pepper of peppercorns. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, like having that, like we're able now to pursue this. I think most people would look at a 1.7 rosin strain for hash and be like, no, I'm not going to work with that. But, our situation allows it. We both, me and my business partner, really love smoking it. So now we're sitting here and crossing it to all the males that we can find that like we think will bring those hash numbers up. And like, just the more people that are able to do things like that, I'm for it. I don't care how you do it, just do it and put it out there so we can trade.
yeah. I'm the same way about the term pollen chucker because, to be fair, most people didn't start with their own inbred, long worked line that I always call it the Schrodinger seed paradox, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it describes a breeder who somehow is brand new to the game, who's never made a single seed, but somehow also only used their own genetic material that they had somehow been inbreeding on their own for decades. Like,
Uh-huh.
the notion is that you're supposed to start with something that didn't belong to somebody else at
Uh-huh.
some point. Every
Uh-huh.
breeder started with somebody else's work.
Yeah,
That's
that's
the
super
nature of
super
starting a
dualistic
seed
at the end
line.
of the day. Like it's just drawing a line between me and somebody else. Like, yeah, they did the work themselves, but again, open source. Like, I don't think it matters.
Yep. Yeah, and I
Um,
mean that's one of those things that I've spoke on a lot about. I always kind of joke that I just look at them as crayons, and if somebody else takes one of my crayons and paints a masterpiece and it means something to
well
them,
said.
and they make a strain that it impacts them and their friends and their lives and their loved ones, it's the greatest thing you could do, right?
Yeah,
So,
for
like,
sure.
at the end of the day, you can't control what happens when you sell somebody a pack of seeds.
No, not
You
at all.
can't,
And
like,
why would you want to?
so why get so upset about it? Like, there's
Yeah.
so many breeders that really get a chip on their shoulder. I always joke it's usually breeders that paid ridiculous amounts of money
Or
for
their
their
first
cuts,
genetics.
right? For their
Yeah.
cuts. And so the truth is, of course, you got to be a dickhead when you pay $30,000-$40,000 for a cut just to
Yeah.
make sure that you now have some hype shit that nobody else has.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, we all started with somebody else's work. We all started with somebody else's work. Doesn't really matter how you got into the game. And it's like, to continue that process of like, we should all be able to work with whatever we want to work with
Mm.
until this is all corporate owned and they can literally tell you you can't work with that strain.
Right.
Like, that's what we should be doing.
Yeah.
We're finding things now that have never been seen in the gene pool,
Right.
whether that's unique terpene profiles, whether it's flavor combinations, whether it's unique cannabinoid terpene combinations. Like, that's one of the most underappreciated things
Yeah.
right now, because with so many strains, you might get lucky if you got a terp profile, you might get lucky if you got a cannabinoid profile, you're really lucky if you got both. But to
Yeah.
finally start to compare those, because all of that is relevant when we talk about how cannabis affects you. Because
Right.
it's not just one terp, it's not just two terpenes, it's not just cannabinoids.
It's
It's
the
this
entourage
beautiful
effect.
soup of
Yeah.
all of it.
Yeah.
And the reason that almost every time you smoke a different strain is different is because every strain has its own fingerprint, its
Right.
own cannabinoid terpene profile.
Right.
Even the same strain grown in different grows
Right.
will have a different fingerprint,
Right.
because the amount of terps are different, the amount of cannabinoids, the ratios are different.
Well, and that's something that really appeals to me about outdoor growing too, is like the whole terroir aspect and that local
Right.
climate. And then like, I've got a lot of the same cuts we had last year. It's going to be a lot different if I don't get rain for the first 2 months of the season. I don't know what that's going to do, but it's definitely going to change the thumbprint, like you said. And I think too, you touched on like the terpenes aspect. I think that's something, it's getting more common knowledge, but especially from like a public corporate cannabis customer side, because of the way they do the high THC lab tests and
Right.
like all that, the aspect of what the terpenes are actually doing to our bodies, I think, is lost in a lot of situations. So I think that's the other cool thing about the polyhybrids is we're not only getting new flavor profiles, we're getting new mental effects and new physical effects as well, because we've got these terpene combinations that are affecting our bodies that we've never gotten to experience before.
Yeah. So I have a good friend that we play cards once a week with, and she's an herbalist, and she's very into aromatherapy
Mhm.
and this, that, and we got into a deep thing about terpenes the other day. And I kind of broke out my joke that, like, with all the terpene talk, you're essentially admitting that you believe every bit of aromatherapy,
Yeah.
because the two are in essence almost
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
exact
for
same
sure.
thing,
Yeah.
because the nature of terpenes affecting your mood is
Yeah.
not super scientifically understood,
Yep, it's not.
and is still one of those things, as much as I hate to say it, kind of borderlines in the realm of pseudoscience, simply because
Yeah,
it's
pro
not
science.
something that's had millions of dollars in research money thrown at it. And
Yeah, and they
you know,
can't.
we don't really understand the entourage effect of
Yep.
cannabinoids and terpenes. But I think most people will tell you, and there's a couple terpenes we can point to specifically
Right.
that definitely have distinct, provable, empirical
Yep.
effects. So another big problem when we talk about something like how a strain affects me is at first admitting that 90% of how a strain affects you isn't the strain.
Yeah.
90% of how a strain affects you is the day that you've had, the mood that you're in,
Well, the
what did you have
placebo
for lunch,
effect
how
is
long ago
incredible.
did you eat,
Yep.
are you depressed, are you already kind of down, how do you feel, what's going on in your day. That all will affect you more than the strain that you smoke.
Yep.
So the things in cannabis that do affect you like that are generally pretty small in their effects and in their quantities. So
Right.
many of these terpenes, there's not a huge amount of each individual terpene in relation to everything that's there. So
Right.
the fact that we're even having a discussion about how terpenes affect us is very much in the same of, like, accepting that there's things like aromatherapy that
That
on
we
their
don't
surface
understand.
don't entirely make a ton of sense, but that are very much real,
Yep.
and we just haven't thrown the research to understand it fully.
Right. Well, see, and I really have learned as I get older to like appreciate the like mystery of things like that. And like,
Right.
yeah, from a business standpoint, like, and from helping clients, from that sort of approach, I want to figure these things out. But it's also a lot of fun to just be like, you know, and this is something where we get, because we're, like I said, we're pretty small time at this point, so we have pretty personal relationships with a lot of customers as far as like trying to help them figure out what they like. Um, and it's interesting watching how people decide that, and then watching, I think, the placebo effect, both of like what you think you're going to like and what you think you're not going to like, is incredible.
Yeah.
And like, even it's why you see hash jars now with these big words on them that say what they're supposed to taste like. And it's like, because a lot of people's brains, especially if you haven't smoked hash that long and your palate's not that developed, you look at a big, colorful rainbow word that says strawberry, and you take a dab, and you're like, "Oh, that's strawberry for sure." And
Right. Yeah.
sometimes it's
Yeah.
not.
And that's, I get into one all the time with people about naming, because there's, I guess I'll call them purists. There's
Mm-hmm.
people that think that every cannabis strain should essentially somehow relate to what it's going to taste like, which is such an exhausting
Yeah.
thing, because so many of the most obvious ones of those are taken and long gone.
Uh-huh.
And but then, like you said, the reality is that when we come up with descriptors for cannabis, very rarely are they perfect. It's
Right.
often us doing a best approximation of what we think. So I always use gas as a good example.
Yeah, for
And I
sure.
don't mean gas in the sense of just all good weed. I mean specifically your SFV, your
Yeah.
Triangle Kush, your Hells Angels, those like gassy strains. It's not much gas. Like when you
No.
smell actual gasoline that got on your foot while you were pumping gas and
Yeah.
you get in the car, it doesn't smell anything like that. There's
Yeah.
no
Oh,
petrol.
me and my
There's none of that like diesel-y petrol thing.
yeah,
It's just the, you know, and it's because that's the best thing we can relate to is
right.
that it is kind of gassy. It does kind
Yeah.
of, you know, there is a little bit of that. But in the grand scheme of things, it's just the closest we can get to describing it, you know?
Right. Me and my business partner were just talking about papaya in this way. Because if you've ever eaten a papaya, it's not it's not the same thing at
Right,
all. But
right,
what else do you call that? It's island fruit of some sort. So like,
right.
you know, I see it. There's some things like banana OG, the like Oregon Kid banana OG. That's banana. You know, but that's even more like banana taffy. It's not like ripe banana. So all these names, and
See,
something I
that
like
one,
that you do with your work is just you just start it over. It's just like give it a name that like I feel and
yeah,
like I have fun with it.
yeah,
And I think that's a direction I'd like to see more breeders do, where rather than like pigeonhole what the terp
right,
profile is to people from the very beginning.
right. Yeah, the only reason I was going to interject there is because Banana Kush is like it's the greatest thing in my life. Like, I'm a banana fiend for
Yeah,
everything, and
yeah,
Banana OG is actually not as banana as it gets. Now, even the Banana OG, the like the what was the Chiquita cut, that's probably the closest I've seen Banana OG, because Banana OG is something that's very there's tons of seeds of it. It's not
right.
just one cut. So
Yeah,
there's a million different things that are technically banana OG.
right.
Now, there's also a cut that goes around real heavily commercial grows in Colorado that is called Banana Kush. It's
Okay.
a tiny little, almost never gets real big, super white, but very banana candy.
Mm,
Like, you know what I'm saying? But like, you know, long story short, everything flavor is subjective. So
yep.
when one person says, I think it tastes like this, or this, somebody else will tell you, oh, no, I think it's more, you know, more. And the other thing is, how many descriptors do you know?
Yep.
So
That's a
your
big.
palate is often limited by the
Yep.
number of things you can describe by
Right.
taste, not always how well you can taste everything.
Uh-huh.
So it's like so
Well,
many
it's like
things.
I see this with food too. Like
Oh,
growing
yeah,
up, we cooked a lot, and like if you give a lot of really good complex food profiles to people that have eaten a very shitty basic diet their whole life, they can't comprehend what's going on.
right.
And a lot of the times
You
people
just
don't
don't
even
have the
like it.
experience. Yeah, you just don't have the experience.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
you've never tasted it to describe it.
Right, and that goes back to like why I think such a big part of our jobs, you, I, and everybody else that grows or messes with cannabis is just smoking all the time, like and experiencing that. And it's crazy even looking back. I've been smoking hash for 10 years, but if I look back 3 years ago, my terp understanding and my like palate was nowhere near where it is now. And there's things that I notice now that I just didn't have a word for a long time.
Well, see, it's also like in that thread. So I have friends that have been smoking 20 plus years, right? They, all of the best batches of weed that I've ever had, I shared with these friends. And they can definitely tell you great weed from garbage weed,
Right,
but they still think weed just tastes like weed,
right.
you
Yeah,
know?
I
And
had
there's
someone say
so,
that to me the other day, actually, and just like any weed I try, it just tastes like weed, and it is a lot of. It's just so experiential, and I think you hit something too with like it depends on where you're at that day, and that's something that's hard for us to figure out. Is like when we sit down and R&D stuff, like the preparation and like well, when did I eat? Like how unbiased am I right now? How much did I just like this plant while I grew it? And so now I'm already convinced in my mind that this is the one and not getting like caught in those boxes. And somebody just said, you have to want to taste more. And yeah, I
yeah.
like that.
Well, I mean, like we're almost at our end, but there's one more thing in the kind of subjective nature of all of this that I get into the discussion about people when they're like that one strain from back in the day.
Mm,
So your memory of that one strain from back in the day is not just a bag of weed. Your
yeah,
memory from that day is the amazing day you had,
The
whatever
nostalgia.
special happened in your life,
Yeah.
all of those things. So the chances that even if you had that exact same strain today,
Yeah.
the chances of it affecting you the way it did that one time when everything was in this particular mindset, that's not replicatable.
Yeah.
So it's like so many people are chasing a strain that they from back in the day, but they're really chasing a memory.
Yeah. No, nostalgia is a really powerful force too. So like, I think it's important to remember just in life in general that memory is incorrect.
Yeah,
Like memory is not what actually happened. Especially the further we get away from it and the more experiences we add
yeah,
on top of it, that it devolves into something that, especially if we put it on a pedestal, we can just idealize it, and then yeah, you can spend a whole breeding line going after this thing that you just like because you like your girlfriend was real nice to you that morning
it was a
20
great
years ago.
time in high school. High school was
Yep.
good for a lot of people, and you have these memories of like
Yep.
that day we were in the car and we had just gotten out of the game, and then we got this great weed, and then
Yep.
it's like you could have that weed today and it's not going to bring back the exact same, and so many people are chasing, but they're not chasing a strain necessarily. They're chasing
Right.
a point in time, a memory. Anyway, so we're out of time, man. I
For
appreciate it
sure.
so much.
Yeah.
These
Yeah.
always go by so quick when we got a couple people that are
Right.
fairly knowledgeable and we got a good chat. So I appreciate it. Where can people find you? Seeds,
Yeah,
hash,
pretty
otherwise,
much
whatever
just
you got
here
going on?
to follow the Instagram. We post pretty often and talk about all sorts of stuff like this. So yeah, always open, like share everything we figure out. So send messages. We love to chat, all the things.
We're going to start doing some more things. Discord is a little bit better for doing like 3- and 4-way conversations.
Yeah.
So we're going to start planning some things on Discord that are more kind of round table, 2 or 3 people, a little more open ended. So yeah, we'll definitely get you to hop on, man.
Yeah,
That
definitely.
was super
Anytime.
great. And I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So
Everybody have
as
a nice night.
usual, man, anybody looking for my gear, www.terpene.com, terpfi3nd.com. Can also find us at this moment at terpfiend on Instagram, terpfi3nd. That's got a link tree. Go hit that and get all of the rest of my good stuff and everywhere else you can find me. And go please follow me on a page that's not Instagram. Go to YouTube, go to Reddit. We're going to start putting more stuff on Twitter. So if you're on any of those, please go follow us there because who knows how long this Instagram thing will last. Thank you guys so much. We still have a couple spring mystery bags, and we still have some terp flavor packs. So if you're looking for 2 or 3 citrus strains, 2 or 3 poopy strains, 2 or 3 gassy strains, we got it in a bundle at a discount for you, terpfiend.com. Thanks, you guys. We'll see you guys on Wednesday.